Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. And I encourage all of you to share this podcast with your family and friends. We talk about a lot of important issues on this podcast, and this week is no different. But before I jump into the main topic for the episode, there are two things I want to talk about briefly. The first is President Biden and his pardon of his son, Hunter Biden. This should not come as a surprise to anyone. It shouldn't shock anyone. I see everyone, they're like aghast at what took place. Why? If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you know I said he would pardon his son on multiple occasions. Now, everyone's making a big fuss about it, but you have to pick your battles, right? You can't feign outrage at every little thing, and not for nothing. But as a father, I would have done the same thing. The only difference is I would have done it a lot sooner than he did it. I get that Biden lied. He said he wouldn't pardon Hunter, and he does exactly the opposite. But Biden's a liar. We have a 50-year history of him lying. And I get that there's double standards. I get the fact that this pardon was also to protect the big guy himself. I'm not justifying it. It's obviously not right. And it's completely unethical, but I'm not going to get all worked up over it. And I also don't suspect that this is going to be the last Biden that gets a pardon. He's probably going to pardon his brother and maybe even pardons himself the last day in office. There's nothing on the Constitution that would prevent him from doing that. Sure, he's going to do it under the guise that he doesn't want his family to be targeted by Trump's DOJ. But it's really about protecting the Biden family and the Biden brand. It's not about worrying if the next administration is going to come in and target you. Remember, the left always projects. They accuse their opponents of what they themselves are guilty of. And in this case, it's no different. They are hypocrites. They're screaming that if his last name wasn't Biden, he wouldn't have been prosecuted in the first place. Now, that's obviously a lie. I mean, how many people do you know that will get away with tax evasion? How many people do you know that can lie on a federal form and not get prosecuted? I don't know too many. And let's be honest here. If Trump wasn't Trump, we wouldn't have seen Letitia James go after the Trump organization. We wouldn't have seen E. Jean Carroll work with the New York State legislature to temporarily suspend the statute of limitations so she could bring a BS civil suit against Trump. We wouldn't have seen the Mar-a-Lago FBI raid. We wouldn't have seen the 4 criminal indictments. So to all you on the left, please do me a favor. Spare me your righteous indignation. Now, the good news is that Hunter Biden can no longer invoke the Fifth Amendment, his right to remain silent. The Fifth Amendment allows us to refuse to answer any type of questions on the grounds that we don't want to incriminate ourselves. Well, now that Hunter Biden can incriminate himself because he's pardoned, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Is he going to be called before Congress? And if Congress subpoenas Hunter to testify, what's Hunter going to say? That's going to be interesting. And so we'll see if that happens. Or maybe Congress is going to turn the page on the Biden family business. In any event, I think the American people deserve answers. We deserve to know how the Biden family got rich off the backs of the American taxpayers. We deserve to know about the Biden family business and the extent of foreign influence within it. These aren't trivial matters. And it's up to Congress to ensure that we get answers. So hopefully they do their job of oversight and we do get answers. Now, the second thing I wanted to mention briefly was President Trump's announcement of Kash Patel as FBI director. And of course, I interviewed George Hill like 2 days before this announcement. I would have loved to have asked him on the podcast so he could give you his thoughts. But Monday's episode was a great one. Make sure you check it out nonetheless. The Kash pick was a great choice. And now the current FBI director, Christopher Wray, has to make a decision. Either he resigns when Trump takes office or he gets fired. It's as simple as that. Wray has always been completely useless. Someone who is more intent on protecting the swamp as opposed to ensuring that the FBI actually lives up to its mission and demonstrates the highest levels of integrity. And Kash needs to clean house at the FBI. I can only imagine the reaction of those on the 7th floor of the J. Edgar Hoover building right now when Trump announced that Kash Patel is going to be the FBI director, because it seems that all the right people are mad that President Trump selected Kash Patel. They're losing their minds. I mean, if you watch these people, it's glorious to witness, especially the meltdowns of Andrew McCabe, John Brennan, James Comey. It's beautiful to watch. Now, Patel needs to immediately release all the Russian collusion documents that were declassified at the end of Trump's first term. He ordered them to be released, and the deep state never released them. We need to see those documents immediately once he gets into office. And I want him to expose how deep the political weaponization of the FBI has gone. He needs to terminate every single bureaucrat that puts ideology ahead of public service. Our bureaucrats are not supposed to be ideological zealots. They are there to serve the public, but they believe that the public exists to serve them. And the FBI has been operating with impunity for decades. It is time it comes to an end. It has nothing to do with retribution like the left says. It has everything to do with accountability. We must demand accountability within government. Without it, you witness the abuses of power that we've seen over the last several decades. And understand, there's going to be a lot of forces that will do whatever it takes to prevent Kash Patel from becoming the FBI director. His confirmation hearings are going to make Justice Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings look like a cakewalk. The Democrats are very good at maligning and slandering any type of political opposition. This is no different, and this is what brings me to today's topic. Today, I want to focus on the Biden administration's war on Christians. It's something that's been going on for a while now, but it's been largely ignored by the media, and I'll talk about what's going on when we get back from the quick break, so everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. report. Now, before the break, we dove into the headlines with the announcement of President Biden and his pardon of Hunter. We also talked about President Trump's bold pick of Kash Patel as the FBI director. Now, I want to shift gears to the main topic of today's episode, because this topic hits at the very heart of America's identity. The Leadership Institute's Campus Reform published an article a couple of days ago that outlined how the Biden administration has declared war on Christian colleges and universities throughout the country. Now, in full disclosure, I am a Campus Reform higher education fellow, but today I'm not talking to you as a higher education fellow. I'm talking to you as the host of this podcast. The statistics are chilling, and they reveal just how targeted Christian institutions have become. When we look at faith-based schools, they represent less than 10% of the student population nationwide. Less than 10%. Yet nearly 70% of the penalties imposed by the Department of Education's Office of Enforcement have been aimed squarely at these institutions. So Christian schools only serve 10% of the population, yet they get 70% of the penalties imposed on them. And the fines levied against Christian schools average about $815,000. This is 3 times higher than the $228,571 average imposed on secular institutions. Why the discrepancy? And it's simple, because this administration has made it clear. Christian schools that dare to stand against the leftist agenda are going to be punished. Let's not dance around the facts. Let's just state the obvious. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona has admitted this publicly. He's even gone so far as to suggest that he'd like to see these institutions shut down altogether. And it's not just about a few fines or penalties. I want to make that clear. It's about the intent behind these actions. Because what the Biden administration is doing is wielding its power to marginalize and silence Christians. And the Biden administration's blatant targeting of Christian colleges and universities is an unacceptable abuse of power, strikes to the very core of America's values. And this weaponization cannot go unchallenged. This weaponization of the government against people of faith, it's an affront to religious freedom and everything our nation stands for, everything it was built on. And it's not just happening in higher education. This isn't just about the colleges and universities. We shouldn't forget the FBI's infamous Richmond product, the report that labeled traditional Catholics as potential domestic violent extremists. Why did they proclaim that Catholics have a proclivity toward extremism? Why were they singled out? They say it's because most Catholics are pro-life and believe that God created only 2 genders. Those are positions that a lot of Americans have, regardless of if they're a Catholic or not. And you know, when you go back a decade ago, 2 decades ago, being pro-life was an acceptable political position. You may have disagreed with it. You may not have liked it, but it was a political position that everyone understood and respected. So you see, it goes to the Department of Homeland Security, Jen Easterly, the director of CISA, where it's about cognitive infrastructure. It's about controlling the thoughts and behaviors of the American people. When you are targeting Catholics and want to infiltrate Catholic churches because you believe that Catholics are domestic violent extremists, not because they engaged in any type of domestic terrorism, not because they engaged in any type of criminal activity, not because they engaged in any type of harassment or threats of others. When you are targeting people simply because they have a political belief that life begins at conception and that there are only two genders, you know that we don't have public servants anymore. These are ideological zealots, and they're ideological zealots that want to target the Christian community because the Christian community, particularly Catholics, they don't bow to leftist orthodoxy. That's why they're declared radical extremists. And not for nothing, but understand that these same people, these same ideological zealots, they don't have the cojones to do this to Muslims, but they know they could get away with it when it comes to Christians. I mean, when you look at it, what have they done to stop the anti-Semitism that is spewing out in college campuses around the country, the blatant anti-Semitism that we're witnessing against Jews and the anti-Americanism that we're witnessing because of the Israel-Gaza situation? See, they know they could target certain groups because those groups don't really stand up for themselves. And while Director Wray testified that no actions were taken in regard to the Richmond product, and once he found out about it, he pulled it because he was horrified by it, we know that's a lie. First, we know it goes well beyond one field office, like Wray said. We know it included field offices in California, Oregon, Washington, probably a number of other states. We don't know the extent yet because, let's face it, Congress isn't getting the information they requested. Congress has demanded people testify. They haven't testified as an internal investigation is going on in the FBI. And Congress is feckless when it comes to these issues because they should sanction the FBI for not turning over any of this information. We need to know how many other field offices were involved in this. But secondly, it is my belief that the only reason that Director Wray rebuked the Richmond product was because it was leaked to the public. Had it never, ever been released, do you think he would have pulled it? Do you think he would have spoken out about it? And let me ask you, where was President Biden in all this? President Biden, who constantly talks about his Catholic faith, constantly brings up his Catholic upbringing. Has he ever released a statement on the FBI abuses in regards to the Richmond product? Did he release a statement defending Catholics? Did he call Director Wray into his office, give him a tongue lashing? And the answer is no to all those questions. And the propaganda press is disgraceful because they never asked him a single question about this, at least as far as I'm aware. So this is an administration that views faith not as a cornerstone of American life. They view it as an obstacle to its ideological ambitions. We are a Judeo-Christian society. They don't like that. And it's even more insidious than that. Because while Christian colleges are being hit with crippling fines and bans from receiving any federal student aid, including Pell Grants, all designed to crush them, the Biden administration is simultaneously funneling millions of taxpayer dollars into pushing its woke agenda. And I'm talking about 50,000 taxpayer dollars to study so-called white supremacist extremism, $4.5 million for an equity center at LSU, $1 million to re-engineer biology classes to align with gender ideology, $50,000 for a DEI math conference. This isn't governance. What's going on is ideological warfare, and people need to wake up because it sets a dangerous precedent. This has much broader implications, this assault that we're witnessing on faith and freedom, and I want to examine that when we get back from this quick break. I want to discuss what's at stake for every American, regardless of whether you're a Christian or not. It should be unacceptable in any format. And so I want to talk about that when we get back from this quick break. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Now, in the last segment, we laid out the facts, right? That the Biden administration unleashed an unprecedented assault on Christian colleges and universities. And it's not just about those institutions. The implications of what the Biden administration is doing extend far beyond any type of religious education. It's about the survival of liberty in America. liberty that we take for granted, liberty that we don't appreciate anymore because we've had it too easy. And when the government is weaponized against a specific group, it doesn't matter if it's Christians, Catholics, any other faith. What it does, it erodes the rights that protect all of us. It's bigger than partisan politics. It's about defending the First Amendment, ensuring that no administration, Democrat or Republican, ever wields its power to suppress dissent, to punish those who refuse to conform to an ideological agenda. That's what freedom is all about. And that's why we have to take a moment to reflect on what's really at stake here. America was founded on the principles of religious freedom. It's enshrined in our Constitution. It's in the very First Amendment for a reason. And yet, under this Biden administration, what have we witnessed? We've seen growing hostility toward the First Amendment. Just look at how they built a censorship industrial complex to silence Americans. Look at how they wanted to create a disinformation governance board to determine what you can and cannot say. Look at the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism that wants to control what you can and cannot see, what you can and cannot read, what you can and cannot hear. Look at how they labeled protests, particularly during the coronavirus, as anti-government or anti-authority protests. And that's what it all fits in line with the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. I've been reporting on the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism since it was released in June of 2021. And I still, for the life of me, cannot understand why Republicans, conservatives, and the old school liberals don't speak about this document. Why nobody pays attention to this document. It's only 31 pages, and every American should be horrified when they read it because it easily could be used to weaponize anyone. Doesn't matter if it's a Republican or Democrat in office. How would the Democrats like if Donald Trump takes Biden's national strategy for countering domestic terrorism and just replaces all the anti-government, anti-authority examples that are listed in it with Democrats? And Democrat actions and Democrat positions? How would they like that? See, they wouldn't like it very much, but nobody talks about this document. It's really concerning because this is a document that should be rebuked by all sides. And the churches should be speaking out. I'm sorry. To me, ever since the coronavirus, I'm largely disgusted at what I've witnessed. You know, during the coronavirus, you had state governments throughout the country determine when, where, and how we can exercise our faith. And you had few religious leaders speaking out against it. Many of them simply bowed down and accepted this. Really is disgraceful. Really is. Because the war on faith is an extension of policies that we began to see under the Obama administration. It's the same underlying goal. You compel religious institutions, especially Christian ones, to conform to leftist ideology. If this feels familiar, it's because it is. During the Obama administration, we witnessed the government targeting faith-based organizations. The most notable case was the Little Sisters of the Poor. And for those of you who may not recall, the Little Sisters, a group of Catholic nuns, these are Catholic nuns, they were dragged through years of litigation, years of legal battles, because they refused to comply with an Affordable Care Act mandate that violated their religious beliefs. What was the fight about? The federal government wanted to force these nuns, whose lives are devoted to serving the elderly poor, to provide contraceptive coverage in their health plans, including abortion coverage, even though this directly contradicts the Catholic faith. Now, it's not that the administration was indifferent to their beliefs. It was open hostility. I mean, you're really going to talk, and this is why the Attorney General, Eric Holder at the time, God, that guy is such a weasel. But you see the hostility. And the Little Sisters case was a national symbol of the government's attempt to use its power to coerce institutions into adopting policies that go against its doctrines. And make no mistake, this is in line with the Marxist ideology. It's not full-on Marxism. But understand what they do in communist societies. What's the first thing that they stamp out? Well, it's religious institutions, because you can have no entity that is higher than the state. And if people have faith that a God exists, if people have faith that there's something much bigger out there, well, then the state doesn't seem as important. So you have to stamp out religious beliefs to make sure that the state is omnipotent. That's what it comes down to. And under the Biden administration, we're seeing the hostility resurrected. It's the same hostility, only it's taken on an even broader and more aggressive approach. The colleges and universities that are being disproportionately fined, stripped of federal aid, it's designed to destroy them. And that's what Secretary Miguel Cardona wants to do. That's why he made the remarks about wanting to see these schools shut down. That's his quote, shut down. And it shows it's not about enforcement. It's not about fairness. It's all about eliminating faith and putting the state above religion. The Biden administration, just like the Obama administration, they want to compel these institutions to abandon their values, weaken their faith, adopt policies that align with the leftist ideology, whether it's forcing nuns to violate their faith, finding Christian universities into submission. The strategy is always the same. They want to use the full weight of the federal government to punish those who refuse to conform. The targets may differ, but the objective remains unchanged. Understand, silence any person, silence any institution, silence any group that stands in their way or dissents from their narrative. For Christians, that means that you have to pressure them to adopt policies on gender ideology, on abortion, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, all things that are antithetical to their beliefs. Anyone who refuses is targeted, they're met with public vilification, they're silenced. Whenever they talk about something like unity, remember, they want unity through submission. Bow to their ideology, keep your mouth shut, and then we get to enjoy the freedoms they allow us. But sorry, to me it doesn't work that way, nor should it. We have a right, an obligation to speak up and speak out. Because over the last several years, we've witnessed ordinary Americans targeted by this administration, silenced and censored for daring to dissent. We've seen parents complaining at school board meetings targeted. We've seen conservative institutions targeted. We've witnessed Christians and Jews being targeted. If everyone remains silent, who is going to be next? And this is why every American, regardless of their faith, should be outraged. Because it's not just about Christianity. It's about protecting the liberties of every single American, regardless of their race, regardless of their religion, the color of their skin, the gender they conform to. The good news is their grip on power is obviously weakening. Americans reject what they're peddling. There's still millions that support it, and I'll talk about that in another episode. Tens of millions. But there are a lot of Americans that are rejecting the totalitarian state. And there's more that can be done to rein in the out-of-control bureaucracy. First of all, Congress needs to step up their game. Okay, they actually need to exercise their power of oversight and to crush any government institution that defies this oversight. Congress needs to investigate the Department of Education's enforcement practices. We can't allow bureaucrats to hide behind closed doors as they dismantle our rights. Transparency is non-negotiable. They need to hold these people in before Congress, make them testify publicly, and guess what? If the abuses prove to be true, then dismantle the Department of Education. Then it doesn't deserve to be a government entity. They've abused their power. They should be punished for it. Second, the impacted institutions need to fight back. Any college and university that is targeted because they are a faith-based institution, they need to file a civil liberty complaint with the Department of Justice. They need to take these cases to court and have them adjudicated. The Constitution is on their side. And now they may get an attorney general that's also on their side with Pam Bondi. Out of all the issues that exist out there, the biggest issue for this new administration is the weaponization of our government, the weaponization of our government institutions. And the new administration needs to uncover how deep this goes, fire any bureaucrat that puts ideology before the agency mission. And understand, these bureaucrats are going to do anything they can to undermine the incoming administration. They're not going to go down without a fight, but this administration needs to remain steadfast. This is the biggest issue. And then it's up to us. It's up to us to speak out. Silence is no longer an option. Whether you write your congressional representatives, whether you support organizations that defend religious freedom, whether it's raising awareness, we have to make it clear as a public that we're not going to tolerate this against any group of people. I don't want to see leftist extremists silenced and censored. I don't want to see those that may believe in communism silenced and censored. See, that's real freedom. They get to espouse their ideology and try to persuade other people to adopt it. I don't want to see them marginalized. Let's have the debate because the facts are on our side. I'm not scared of the leftist ideology. Let's debate it in the public square and see where everyone stands. We are a Judeo-Christian society. This war on Christianity is not just a war on religion. It's a war on freedom. It's a war on America's identity. It's a fight for the soul of our nation, and it's one that we cannot afford to lose. Now, I hope you found the content of this episode informative. If you did, please go to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, leave a 5-star rating, take 30 seconds to write a review. Also, share this episode with your family and friends. The stakes are very high. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.